So welcome everyone. I'm Cheryl Miller, director of the Hertog Foundation, and I'm excited to host you for a conversation that I hope will give you a teaser of the political studies program experience. Our guest today is Dr. Ryan Hanley, a longtime instructor for political studies, Boston College professor, and proud Concord, Massachusetts native. Ryan will talk about a piece of Concord history, the Concord School of Philosophy, and what this experiment in liberal learning shares with political studies. Last summer, you helped kick off the political studies program with a talk about the Concord School of Philosophy, a summer school loosely based on Plato's Academy and founded in 1879. Can you tell us about the school and why it reminded you of the political studies program?
Sure. No, I mean, the connections are so tight. It's really remarkable that we don't know more, and there hasn't been more done on the remarkable Concord School of Philosophy. I think I was particularly struck by it. As you mentioned, I am a Concordian, as we're supposed to call ourselves now, and the site of it is just down the block from where I live now. And so I was drawn to it on that level. But really, I mean, the substantive reasons that make it so remarkable have so much to do with what happens in DC over the summer at Hertog. And having been a beneficiary of as an instructor at Hertog now for several years, I have a pretty good sense of much of what happens there. And I've always loved Hertog's mixture of a couple of things. One is the opportunity to study classic texts in the history of political philosophy, to study them closely with some outstanding teachers. Unless you get me, then it's a whole different ballgame. But my colleagues are really excellent. But joined to the study of, obviously, these classic texts over the summer is a remarkable opportunity to be in Washington, D.C., and to study not just the texts in the ivory tower, but the texts in a place of course, tremendous political relevance, the center of it all. And this opportunity to study both the foundations and practice of American democracy simultaneously, it keeps me coming back every summer to Hertog. What strikes me so much about this Concord School of Philosophy, this little experiment that happened in Concord, Mass, starting in 1879, is they were after the same thing. What they did was they brought people from all over the country. It was a fairly cheap subscription. You had to pay to go, but not much. And you would come to Concord and you would study classic texts. And they, in fact, had seminars on Plato and Aristotle and Kant and Hegel. And these were seminars not led by any slouches. The founder of the whole enterprise was Bronson Alcott, who is known as Louisa May Alcott's father in particular, author of Little Women, Louisa May. But you would also have, the pleasure of some really outstanding lecturers, not least of which Ralph Waldo Emerson, who also lived just down the block, and a number of really remarkable professors coming up from Harvard, coming from Yale. And they came to Concord to lecture on Kant and Aristotle and Hegel and Plato. And at the same time, the students would spend their afternoons touring some of the most remarkable places in terms of America's founding moment. The Concord is, of course, for those that might remember their AP US history, the battles of Lexington and Concord, fought on April 1775, were the start of the Revolutionary War. And the students, when they came in their afternoons after their lectures, would visit places like the North Bridge in Concord, where the first shots of American resistance were fired. And they would attend also special discussion sessions in the evening on such topics as, quote unquote, the making of freedom, or quote unquote, the political spirit of 1776. And so it was a really remarkable opportunity, I think, for those students to see how ideas and the study of ideas come together with formative moments in American democracy and its practice. And so I've been terribly struck by the parallels between the Concord School and Hertog summer programs. And I only wish, I'm so lucky to be able to teach in Hertog, but I only wish I could go back in time to take Ralph Waldo Emerson's lectures.
Well, one benefit that we have over the Concord School is that we have air conditioning in our classroom, which I don't think they had in that like barn-like.
I've been in that building in July, and it ain't pretty. 4 hours of lecturing on Plato. Oof, it makes DC heat seem like a break.
Absolutely, we have some more humanity than that. One thing that I was struck by in your lecture last year was the connection of liberal arts learning to political or civic education. One observer described the Concord School as being, quote, a conversation on serious topics. The founder sought not an absolute unity of opinion, but a general agreement in the manner of viewing philosophic truth and applying it to the problems of life. So how do you think the study of the classics can help us understand the problems of life we face today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it concerns both partially what we study when we study the classics, but also how we study the classics. I mean, just to go back to the Concord School, the way in which they quote unquote taught the classics was really remarkable. I've used the term lecture here, but the lectures they gave were very short. In fact, most of what happened was interactive discussion at the main sessions. Now, some of those discussions got derailed because once Bronson started weighing in, nobody would ever cut him off. So, but when the conversations went well, the idea was that they were to really reprise what happened in Plato's Academy that we know even from the reports of the dialogues, the idea of genuine back and forth and genuine discussion. And so for those students, and I've read some letters and accounts that are extant of their experiences, they were valuable because they actually, it wasn't passive learning, it was making it their own. And the way that I've taught, both of my seminars here at Boston College, but also certainly at Hertog, I do a bit of setting things up. I do a bit of monologuing, but it's not about just hearing me drone on. It's really about getting into the questions posed by the text, reading the text together, and going where the students want to go and engaging the questions that are in the forefront of their hearts, minds, and souls. So I've even tried to replicate a bit of my teaching, my pedagogy, along the same sort of things that Bronson Alcott was after. And so that's just in terms of how the classics are studied. But Cheryl, you also asked sort of what we can learn about questions about character formation and the good life. And I think that the classic texts offer us remarkable opportunities to be able to, if nothing else, poke our heads out from our current moment and remind ourselves that whatever we think about how things are done now, in the history of philosophy, they were thought about very differently. And encountering these oftentimes alien, sometimes even forbidding territories, I continue to find it very exciting, whether those are ancient texts or medieval texts or early modern texts, if only to give a point of reference, to do a deep dive, to see how concepts of character, of virtue, of fundamental principles of justice, of power, how these were understood then, to understand them as thoroughly as possible from that historical perspective, and then ask, how do we do it today? Do we do it better? Are there things that we can learn from the ways that it was done in previous ages? And so I'm very much, as it were, sort of a comparativist. I'm always thinking about our current moment, but I'm also always thinking about trying to poke my head above or beyond our current moment to understand a little bit better about how some very, very bright individuals that were our predecessors understood fundamental questions and what we can learn from them.
Well, that gives me a great segue into my final question. I'd like to ask you about the course that you're going to be teaching for political studies this summer. This is our opening course, and it gets at one of the broader themes of political studies, virtue and power. Is it possible to live well and do well? And we explored this question through a reading of Plato's dialogues. Ben Story, your counterpart, will be teaching the Gorgias, and you'll be teaching the Republic, or selections from the Republic. Again, we're humane. So can you give us a teaser for this course?
Sure. Let me give you a brief teaser for both of the courses together, and then a particular plug for the Republic. And I say this, Professor Story is an old friend, a man I think very, very highly of, and the Gorgias is simply wonderful. Both courses will compel us to confront the question of what makes human beings truly happy and satisfied and gratified. One thing that's common to both of Plato's dialogues is some terribly powerful challenges from people who don't have a whole lot of patience with old fuddy-duddy concepts about virtue and character and these sorts of things. They talk about self-interest and the gratification of our desires, and especially things such as power and mastery. And one of the questions that comes up in both the Gorgias and the Republic is the question of, could that in fact be the happiest and best way to live? Or are there other lives that might be both beneficial, more beneficial for our polities, but also potentially more beneficial, more satisfying, and more happy even for us in our own right? And so that question, I don't want to speak for Professor Story, but I know that both of us tend to lead with this as one of our central questions to confront in the Platonic dialogues we teach. The Republic, I've particularly enjoyed teaching, partly because it really is seen as the text of my discipline. Political philosophy begins with the Republic, but also because it so squarely focuses on such a particular question with such great relevance to us today, the question of, quite simply, what is justice? And as Socrates and his interlocutors discuss, justice is something very different from how we think about it today. It's not simply judging rights and wrongs or whether other human beings have been harmed through certain actions. It's rather a reflection on, it compels us to reflect on how we hold ourselves, not just what we do, but what we are. And that way of rethinking justice, thinking about it as a character virtue, as something potentially worth pursuing because it can bring us closer to a happy and flourishing life. That's a really exciting way, I think, to approach the dialogue. And it's the way the dialogue presents itself and invites it to be taught and engaged. So for those who are interested in questions, not just of what's justice today, how is justice related to fairness, what's the relationship between justice and injury, all those questions are there in the Republic. But we also get that other side, the question of, if we want to be happy and if we want to be good, what's justice got to do with it? I don't know of any better way to study that question than the Republic. And so I hope that if students find that exciting, they might consider joining us for this summer.
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty compelling teaser. So we'll let Ben Story make his case later on.
All right, good.
So we have some Q&A from students, and we have camera shy students, which is understandable. It's lunch hour and they maybe don't want to impose upon us while they eat their salad at their desk. So I'll ask their questions on their behalf. So one question I have is, what is your favorite part of teaching for the political studies program?
That's a good question. One of the things I really like teaching in political studies is that, I mean, the students are always great. They're always good readers. They've got good backgrounds as academics. But I find really exciting the fact that they're politically engaged. The questions on their mind are questions that are at the forefront of American civic life at the moment. And that energizes me and gets me excited because it enables us to do more than simply exegesis and trying to figure out what Plato meant in these particular passages. And it forces us to confront the question of, why does it matter? How does that actually bear on real politics in our world today? And so I really find it energizing when students come to the table, as they so often do in the Hertog sessions, with those questions in mind, and often leads to really great conversations that I couldn't even anticipate, as I prep earlier in late in May, as I get ready for the summer. The question du jour, who knows what American politics changes every day. So it'll be exciting to see what's on people's minds and how what new things people bring to the table that can bring us some energy as we get our study started.
Great. And our next question is from a student who wants to study the liberal arts, but everyone, probably namely their parents, are telling them they really need to focus on their career and choose a major that's going to help them get a job, especially given how expensive college tuition is. So what case would you make for this student in choosing a major in the liberal arts like philosophy or literature?
Good. All right. I'm a parent of a college student myself, so we may have had versions of this, but of course I'm a little sympathetic to the humanities. I think that is a incredibly important discussion to have with parents. And I'll tell you that I had this conversation growing up with my father, who did not come from a liberal arts background. Back when they used to have want ads in the paper, I would come home from college break, and I was double majoring then in philosophy and intellectual history, my undergraduate program. How great. And he would say, hey, let's flip to I. Oh, look, no jobs for intellectual historians. Oh, my goodness. And so I will say also, my father was very pleased when he saw that I could make a living doing this and it can be done. But one of the conversations that came out of that with my father and that I ended up having with my child is that, we all have to take our own paths, but there's something to be said for getting a job. I'm all for employment and getting jobs. Plato and Adam Smith, the thinkers that I deal with, are all about employment in the city. But whether our job defines us, whether properly just simply the occupation we have defines us, I think most of us, especially younger people today, resist that. I mean, we live in a world that's, just in terms of employment, very fluid, influenced by the gig economy and a lot of transitions. And so I think it's less and less true that people are defined by their occupation. And then the question becomes, well, if you're more than just your job, what are you? How do you discover what that is and what it ought to be? What do you want it to be? And I think for that, humanities has an indispensable role to play. The question of self-discovery, not only does it help you figure out what job might be good for you, that you might be well suited to, but I think it also can be a very healthy thing in helping to structure the rest of life that happens beyond the occupation.
Great. And I've got one more question for you. This also is a vocational question of a student that's thinking about getting a PhD, but all his professors are telling him it's really tough right now. So would you recommend going to graduate school given the tough job market? And if this student does go to graduate school, how can they best prepare themselves?
That's a great question. And we're just in the middle of accepting our PhD applicants for next year. And we've had versions of this conversation too. And I think that you have to talk to your mentors about this. There's no doubt that the job market is tough right now. And it's never been easy in my field, at least in political philosophy. And it's certainly not gotten easier in the past few years. Is that a reason not to go to graduate school? Well, I think it's a reason not to do graduate school in a certain way. I would never counsel somebody to go in debt to do it. I would never counsel that it would be wise to do it and to take 12 years doing it. That happens frequently. But I think if a student has a question and a project and something they really want and need to work out for themselves and has a real passion, to go to a good program, to go to a program that offers funding, to find a mentor that will actually help you develop your thought. If you're able to come out on the other side of that at, say, 26 or 27 and to be debt-free and to have that critical acumen, not to mention a nice piece of parchment from a fancy school. I know a lot of people in my world that have had academic opportunities and have taken that and gone to work in consulting and have found that their skills have been really welcomed at a lot of places. So I think that going in eyes wide open about the reality of the academic job life is absolutely important. Thinking about what else might make you happy, wondering if that could be teaching at a secondary school, being at a great private school or even a great public school that has the right resources and support. That can be a very valuable career, a very satisfying career, and one that welcomes people with our particular skill set. I would only counsel just not to go into it hoping and assuming that there will be necessarily a tenure-track job at the end, because that is, more than anything else, really has changed. But the experience of what one can derive in graduate school, that's very special. And for the right person, I would hate to push somebody away from that if they really felt called and had a question.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Cheryl mentioned, my name is Abby Guidera. I'm the Associate Director at the Hertog Foundation. We have a really great lineup of courses scheduled for this summer, so I'm excited to walk you through some of the details, show you what our political studies courses are, some of the logistics of the program, learn about our constitutional studies courses, and then hopefully clarify any questions that you may have about the application process. So For starters, let's just dive into political studies. So political studies is our flagship program here, and it will run this summer from June 18th to July 29th. This 6-week fellowship in the theory and practice of politics is available for excellent undergraduate students. So I'm sorry, any graduate students or young professionals out there. We have a few other courses you can apply for, but we restrict this course just to undergraduate students. We offer 12 courses over the course of 6 weeks and have some outstanding faculty and speakers on the schedule, some of whom, you've already met Professor Hanley and others I'll introduce to you later on. An important piece to note about this program is that it is full-time. It's residential in Washington, D.C., and the nature of it is such that we ask that you do not have a job or an internship on top of the commitments you're making to your time in the political studies program. We have seminars for you every weekday and activities and meetings for you outside of those seminar courses. And you'll also need to spend time preparing for the week ahead or the courses ahead. So it is a commitment that we ask you to make and in full. And then your time in Washington, D.C., you'll be spending in dormitory accommodations downtown. The dormitory is in walking distance to Hertog's office and to our other classrooms to facilitate ease of travel for you over the course of 6 weeks. And our residence options are suites. So our fellows spend time not only in intellectual community, but in community and fellowship at home and outside of the classroom. And we've heard from our alumni that this has been a really wonderful chance for them to meet and make lifelong friends. Our time over this summer also includes a $2,500 stipend. So we do understand by taking your time and not being able to invest in a job or an internship, we want to offer something to offset that time and any travel or living expenses you might incur over the summer. And all of our course materials will be provided to you. We prepare readers and ship books out to you for all of the courses you take. And they are physical copies. So you will arrive to class every day with your book, your pen, and your paper, and no computers or digital devices on which to take notes. To facilitate full engagement in the discussion and the learning that's on hand for you. So as I mentioned, we offer 12 courses over 6 weeks. So students have the opportunity to choose one of 2 courses. We do our best to give students the courses they prefer and at minimum give them their top 2 choices. Each course will have about 18 to 20 fellows to facilitate really engaging and lively conversation. And this is a key part of your participation in the Hertog Political Studies program. These seminar discussions are discussions. So we want to hear your thoughts, your questions about the text, and that is what makes this experience even more enriching and wonderful for you. So let's dive into the courses we're offering this summer. And if you're interested in diving in deeper to the descriptions of some of these courses, you can find our full course catalog linked to our website. So Ryan Hanley already introduced week 1 for you, but I'll give a few more points in hopes of plugging these courses. As he mentioned, we'll focus on the questions of virtue and power. And we'll read pillars of the Western political tradition, such as the Republic or Gorgias, and ask those seminal questions about what is justice and who should rule, and what are the characteristics of the best political regime. The discussions in these courses will allow students to think deeply about virtues needed to live a good life and examine the relationship between the active and the contemplative life. And I guess through a very practical opportunity to participate in the active life via the running tour that Professor Hanley will offer. Week 2, we'll move to a discussion of persuasion and power. So Professor Robert Bartlett from Boston College will lead our students through a close reading of Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric. Rhetoric is one of the key tools of persuasion that a statesman can wield, so it's necessary to study its components and think about the proper ends. Fellows will examine the different elements that make a speech successful, and they'll also look at speeches from American history. The course will end with fellows participating in a rousing debate to practice their own rhetorical prowess. The other course we offer in week 2 is a close study of Shakespeare's texts, Henry V and Macbeth, and Vicki Sullivan from Tufts University will lead students through this course to study the differences between tyranny and kingship, and they'll also examine what virtues might be necessary for successful rule. These works broach on themes present in Machiavelli's Prince, which will provide supplemental reading for the course. So if you're interested in studying the right use of political power towards those political ends, this class is for you. Week 3 will move to a discussion of liberty and order. Yuval Levin will lead a conversation on liberalism and the common good, leading fellows to a fuller understanding of what liberalism involves and what we should make of its entanglements with republicanism in America. Dr. Levin will guide students through texts from Edmund Burke, Tocqueville, and the Federalist Papers, among others, affording the chance to examine the liberal tradition through classic and contemporary thinkers. Another faculty member from AEI, Jenna Silver-Story, will guide students through a close reading of Democracy in America. This will allow students to gain a comprehensive understanding of the unique qualities of American democracy and how it compares to other democratic and non-democratic regimes. Fellows will be able to grapple with and understand the tensions between democracy and liberalism and think about the role of family, education, and other mediating institutions in forming and supporting political life. Week 4 will take a close look at democratic statesmanship through different case studies on political leaders. Diana Schaub will focus on Lincoln as a statesman and literary artist. The course will reflect on Lincoln's greatest speeches and writings with an aim to understand Lincoln's statecraft in conjunction with his literary craft. Fellows will learn about the use of the art of rhetoric to lead public opinion during a time of national crisis from one of our best examples in history. Flagg Taylor from Skidmore College will devote his time to a study of Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Devoted to wartime statesmanship, this course will analyze FDR and Churchill's strategies for defeating Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. We'll also look at the domestic political environments to see how they managed political coalitions and public opinion. Our 5th week in political studies will turn to some more contemporary debates in politics. Daniel Burns from the University of Dallas and Patrick Brown from the Ethics and Public Policy Center will guide fellows through a conversation on family and politics. A very hot topic in the contemporary political debate, this course will pay close attention to the current conversation while also examining what gave rise to our contemporary state. Fellows will read and understand rival approaches to the family and its role in society and apply these ideas to present-day issues such as childcare, paid family leave, the child tax credit, and marriage penalties. Approaching politics a bit more generally, Charles Fane Lehman from the Manhattan Institute will examine social policy with our fellows. Taking this approach at a wider angle, students will study live debates on welfare reform, crime, race, and family policy, while thinking about how data and social science research can be applied to public policy. Future policy wonks, this is the class for you. Our closing week of political studies will look at grand strategy. Jakob Griegel will guide fellows through a close reading of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, examining a series of strategic challenges and the responses to those challenges. By placing themselves in the position of the Thucydidean characters, fellows will discuss recurrent principles of strategy and the dilemmas that leaders face. Colin Dueck from George Mason University will lead our fellows through a conversation on American grand strategy. They'll look at questions such as, what exactly is grand strategy and why is it important? What legacies of the American founding continue to shape the operation of strategy in the case of the United States? And to what extent has US grand strategy changed over time? If you want to understand the national security challenges and opportunities facing the United States today, this class is for you. Now, all of you graduate students and young professionals I mentioned earlier, this is the course you can take a look at. We'd love to have all undergraduates, graduate students, and young professionals in this course on constitutional studies. Distinct from the political studies program, this is a 1-week in-depth study of judicial decision-making with legal and policy expert Adam White, currently a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. The course will look at landmark cases that might be overturned by the Supreme Court and discuss their implications from American politics. Held from July 31st to August 4th, this is a full-time commitment we ask that you make for 1 week, and will feature amazing guest lectures from Supreme Court advocates. Fellows admitted to this course will also receive a stipend and hotel accommodations to offset any travel and living expenses. Now, on to our application process. Our early decision deadline is right around the corner next Wednesday on February 15th, and our final deadline is March 1st. Remember that one application will be sufficient for all programs. When you submit this application, you can rank your choices so we know which program you would prefer, and we'll certainly take this into account when examining your materials. Another thing to remember is that we review admissions on a rolling basis. So the sooner you get your application in, the greater your chance of being placed in your first choice program and of being selected at all. You can find our application on our website, or you've received it by personalized link from an email from the Hertog staff. After your application is submitted, you'll be notified of any selection as a finalist. And at that time, we'll set up about a 30-minute interview with you to just talk about your interests, your ideas, and what you might want to gain from your participation in this program. There are a few components to our application. The first is just a form that requires some basic personal, educational, and professional information. Next, we'll ask for a CV or resume, and also an unofficial transcript, if you are a current student or a recent graduate and you don't have your final transcript on hand quite yet. We'll also ask for a personal statement, a writing sample, and a letter of recommendation or references. I'll go into some of the particulars on that now. The personal statement should be no more than 1,000 words, and it is the element of the application that we read first. You should spend some time on this, and successful statements tend to give us a sense of the ideas, texts, and questions that most interest you. You should ask yourself, what about me, about my cast of mind, is missing from what's in my resume? Then tell us that. In the case that you are applying to multiple programs, we suggest that you write one statement focused on your first choice program. The writing sample is another important component of our application. We want to see your very best writing and the way you create, develop, and sustain a persuasive argument. We're not interested in length at its own virtue. So if your best paper is 5-page close analysis of reason and passion in Lincoln's Lyceum Address, send us that. We do have page limitations on our submissions. So if you're applying to political studies or constitutional studies, please submit a paper that is no more than 10 pages maximum. It is okay if it's an excerpt from a longer paper. Also, we accept writing across the entire curriculum. So if your writing is not directly applicable to the fellowship that you are applying for, that's okay. We just want to see the very best example that you have of your writing. Now, the reference letter and letter of recommendation is where the applications can get a bit confusing. Some applications might be a bit different from others depending on the program you're applying for or your designation as an applicant. All applicants must submit a CV or resume and an unofficial transcript, regardless of your designation, but the similarities end there. Many applicants come to us from a nomination from a professor, a mentor, or a Hertog alum. If you were nominated, you'll receive an email from the Hertog Foundation inviting you to apply as a nominated applicant. Nominated applicants do not have to submit a letter of recommendation, except for the War Studies program. If you were a previous applicant who received an interview, you may have received sponsored or expedited status. If this applies to you, you will have received an email from the foundation alerting you to this status and providing specific instructions for your application. All other applicants should submit all application materials, including a personal statement, writing sample, and one letter of recommendation. If applying to war studies, general applicants must submit 2 letters of recommendations. And while we haven't discussed war studies today, if that's a program you're interested in learning more about, we are hosting another open house to discuss war studies and security studies the evening of Thursday, February 16th. You can find a sign-up form on our website to register for that seminar if you're also interested in those programs. That's all I have for you today on our application components and the programs on offer this summer. So I hope you'll consider applying for a fellowship with us. We have a great lineup of courses and some unique opportunities to hear from the country's foremost thinkers and practitioners. So apply today and learn more about the Hertog Foundation at hertogfoundation.org.